Ghosts have somehow moved into my day.
Hello everyone, Pamela Zero here. Welcome to Duck Duck Goose, a podcast about the Visitor series. This episode includes chapters 25 and 26 of the book Osei. Thanks for coming along on Osei's journey. Chapter 25, Duck, Urheta. Getting down to the planet was easy, though Duck thought it might have been unnerving for Osei and Sai. They looked cold. The small craft landed gently by a rocky cliff riddled with caves. The team filed silently up a path and into a large cavern tucked behind a small clump of trees. Duck reminded herself to breathe normally. She really wanted to slip out of line and see what this new world looked like and how diggable the dirt was. This was no time for adventures, though, so Duck stayed in line and kept her eyes on the trail. The Punjar security forces were waiting for the team inside the cave. David let his skin suit slip down from his face, but the rest of the team kept theirs in place. A slim man greeted David. "Leader Jor, PSF, thank you for helping." He was wearing a deep brown jumpsuit with a pattern that mirrored the triangular pattern glowing on his skin. "It's our pleasure," David replied. "How does the town look?" "Quiet. The Cura blew up a building earlier today, but they've been doing that every few days." Jor froze for a moment and peered along the line of visitors. "I'm sorry. Is that the visitor child? You brought a child?" "Duck is part of the team," said David. "She'll be staying here in the command center with Ambassador Smith. Duck will assist in translating the team's signals to your men so they're not left out of the loop. Ambassador Smith will be coordinating any deviations from the plan." Jor nodded. "If you're sure." David gave a small smile. "Duck has dealt with the Thrid, been hunted around the galaxy by the service, and can fight better than I can if cornered. We are sure." Jor bowed to Duck. She nodded back, not trusting that her small voice would do her new reputation justice. She knew she was there because Mama Two didn't trust any non-defense team people to take care of her, but she liked what Uncle David had said anyway. Jor gestured towards the back of the cave. This entry cave opens into a general staging area. He walked David over through a stone archway at the back of the cave that led into a larger cavern. "We have a small battery of monitors here. There are a dozen cambots hidden around the town, and we have eyes on key areas." He walked over to a small hallway leading to another room. "Through here is the medical bay, and we have food tucked there as well. We're planning on bugging out of this place ASAP once we get the hostage, so we'll leave most of this and come back later if we want to salvage anything." David nodded. "Sounds good. We'll be ready to go in 5. Fran, Urheta. Fran crouched at the edge of a large marble building. She was the first one into town. She had 4 minutes before the rest of the team started slipping in and taking out the Cura. Every Cura that she could not round up in that time was likely to die. She had no love for them, but could remember clearly the slaughter of the Cura back on Punjar. Fran would spare as many of her team members as she could the horror of that in their memories. She checked her feather costume, then double-checked that the sleeves were a flesh tone that matched her own skin. Duck had her reasons, and she knew the child wouldn't have made such a fuss unless it was important. Fran shook her head and grimaced. Less than 3 minutes now. "Stop dithering," she told herself, and phased up until she was visible, but not touchable. The comm in her ear clicked and she heard David's voice. "In place." "Ditto," whispered Fran. "Go for it. Good luck." There was a click as David went silent. Fran was on her own now. She took a deep breath and then walked around the corner of the building. There were 3 Cura standing in the street. They shouted when they saw her, and she waited patiently while one of them grabbed his comm unit and dialed in, his movements slowed by her phase level. The other 2 pointed their phase guns at her and shot without hesitation. The beams passed through her. She walked slowly onward as the Cura ran up to her. One swung his fist through her, and the other tried to shoot her again. Heart beating a little faster, she started walking a grid pattern through the streets of the town. She stayed clear of the house where the hostage was and focused on being seen. Kira boiled in slow motion out of a hotel as she ran past it, and Fran resisted the impulse to run. There were more of them than she had expected, and their shouts filled her ears, distorted by phase into a nightmare of snarls and moans. In a minute she had at least 100 Kira following her. The info the sentry had calmed in finally had the right effect, and more Kira started pouring in from the side streets. She kept her pace even, her breath steady, and kept moving, surrounded by the Kira stabbing through her with the barrels of their guns, slashing at her with knives, trying to stop her. 2 guards at the back, came through her calm, and then 2 down. Then Eleanor's voice trickled into Fran's ear. No movement from the Kira ship. Extraction good to go. We're gonna need to make a bit of noise over here for a moment. Can you up your distraction level, Feather? Maggie's words were casual, but her voice was low and tense. Fran felt her mind tick over into something more cunning, more deadly, and she reached out her arm, phasing only her hand from the wrist down until it was solid. She let a finger touch one of the Kira and watched the beast tumble backwards, slamming into its fellow soldiers, rocketed back by the stored energy of phase. Well, that's new. Didn't know I could just phase part of me, mused one part of Fran, while the rest of her kept track of where she was on her mental map of the city. Bad guys leaving the target residence. Looks like just a skeleton crew left. We're at 40% civilian evacuation. Keep it up, Feather. David's voice sputtered in her ear, and Fran found herself grinning maniacally as she sucked in the cold air of phase. A squad of archers appeared down the street. Fran pulled her hand back into phase and ran straight at, then through them. Arrows flew, landing on the Kira near her. Some stopped, hit by their own fire. Fran turned around a corner and found the main square. It was surrounded by massive buildings, their roof lines perfect for snipers. A tall, intricately carved pillar in the center of the square rose high in the air, with a statue of the city's founder shining golden on top. Fran phased out of sight. While the Kira searched for her in bewilderment, Fran climbed the pillar in the middle of the square, wedging her fists in the stone filigree and making her way up carefully, relentlessly. She got to the top of the pillar and stood in front of the statue, her feet either side of the founder's gilded feet, the statue's golden arm frozen mid-gesture, curling in front of her. She phased back into sight. The Kira went mad, shooting at her to no avail. Stray beams ricocheted off the surrounding buildings and hit the Kira themselves. Fran felt her shoulders curl inward, cringing inside as beam after beam passed through her and hit the statue. Behind her, the statue, riddled with holes, finally crumpled and tumbled to the ground. She took a deep breath and told herself she wasn't Fran. Not right now. She wasn't perched on top of a slim pedestal high in the air with a few hundred little moments of death aimed her way. She was Feather. She was light, buoyant, effortless. She felt her skin suit shift slightly. The cap on her head tightened, and the bandana thickened on her face. Her leather-looking pants became more flexible, her vest more rigid. The longer she could distract the Kira, the more townspeople could escape. The longer she could hold out, the better the odds of rescuing the hostage. As she looked down at the soldiers milling below her, another squad of Kira came running into the square. These were different from the foot soldiers she had seen so far. These were in disciplined rows and carried both bows and guns. The Kira leading them wore a brilliant red hat covered with small metal attachments that glittered. Fran felt herself both fade and arrive as she submerged completely into the character of Feather. Feather stood stone still on top of the pillar. The Kira howled down on the ground below, and archers raised their bows to take aim. Those massed around the bottom of the pillar slammed into it to dislodge her, but the pillar held. Feather put her hands on her hips and shook her head at the soldiers, egging them on. The Kira's discipline held, though, and they refrained from shooting, knowing that she was in phase and the arrows would simply fly through her and land on their fellow Kira on the other side of the square. Just a few more minutes, crackled David's voice in her ear. 90% of the civilians are safe, and they're bringing Ori out now. They carved a hole right in the back wall of the house where she was held. She's okay. Hang in there. Keep them occupied for just a few more minutes. Feather noticed that the Cura at the edges of the square started to turn and disperse back into the city. She thought frantically, then remembered Duck's insistence on making her arms appear bare. Raising her hands above her head, she faced her palms together, then pulled her hands out of phase. She pulled them apart and then clapped them together as loud as she could. The sound arrowed through the air. The Cura yelled at each other for silence. Was that a normal-sounding clap? No monstrous echo? Was she out of phase? She clapped again, and the sound cracked across the yard. The Cura with the red hat took the bow of a soldier next to him and notched an arrow. Taking careful aim, he shot at her. The arrow lodged deeply in her upper arm, pain stabbing through her. The mask on her face stretched as she grinned and flexed her arm, pointing to the embedded arrow. The Cura archers went mad, screaming epithets and shooting wave after wave of arrows at her. She disappeared into phase, and the arrows fell on the Cura themselves as their leader screamed for order. Chaos reigned as the beasts searched for her among their dead and dying mates, finding her nowhere. Ose, Erheta. Deep in the cave, Ose watched the monitors with concern as the Cura rampaged through the town, still searching for Feather and completely unaware that their hostage was gone. The distraction had worked. David ran by and grabbed a first aid kit, opening it and pulling out an antibiotic syringe and a wrap bandage. He tossed a heel stick towards Ose. "Give us a hand, would you?" Ose followed David into the medical bay. The air grew cold, and Feather appeared suddenly out of phase. She sat heavily on the edge of a bed. An arrow pierced her upper arm, sticking out the back. Ose studied her intently, noting the odd texture of the leather she wore, the shallowness of her breathing, the shape of her head under her tight skullcap. "Idiot," said David in a conversational tone. "They were leaving the square," said Feather in a hushed voice. "They had to think I was out of phase." "Did you have to retract your skin suit, though?" asked David, scowling at her. "It was just for a few seconds," she whispered back. A wry smile flitted across her face. "Sometimes you have to take the arrow." Ose stored every syllable in his mind, analyzing her voice and trying to match it to visitors he had already heard. Nothing. No matches, but she had been whispering. David worked quickly, cutting off the head of the arrow where it passed out of the back of her upper arm and pulling it out backwards with a swift tug. He jammed the syringe deep into the wound, and Ose heard the hiss of the chemicals releasing. David pulled out the syringe, and blood started pumping from the wound. Feather's face stayed hidden by her mask, and she was silent. "Perhaps you would be so kind?" asked David with a look towards Ose. "Of course," replied Ose, doing his best to keep his voice level. He snapped open the heel stick and let the glow play over the seeping hole in Feather's arm. The blood slowed and then stopped. Ose reached out and removed a sliver of wood that was stuck in her skin. He watched his hand move towards her, and time slowed, every detail sharp. He breathed in, trying to get any molecule of her into himself. David started to wrap the bandage around the wound, and Ose saw Feather's sleeve contract, moving out of the way as the bandage was placed. He realized with a shock that the costume she was wearing was just a modification of her skin suit. He wondered what kind of mental steel it took to keep that costume in place mid-fight. "Feather," hissed Duck as she ran into the room. "Are you okay? I saw them shoot and there was a lot of arrows. Are you okay?" She skidded to a stop at Feather's side, her face racked with worry and her hands patting the air uselessly. Feather nodded and pointed to her now bandaged arm. Her pointing hand shifted to a thumbs up, and Duck took a deep breath, and then another. Eleanor came in, saw Feather, and gave David a look of relief. "We need to get going," she said quietly. The visitors started gathering their gear, and in minutes the cave was empty. Ose was the last one to leave. He turned and took one final look before heading out of the cave to the waiting ship. That was where she sat on the bed. That was where she stood. That was where she walked. Something inside him shifted. Whoever Feather was, she had taken a part of him with her as she slipped out of the cave, favoring her injured arm. Osei closed his eyes for a moment. His mind was already so full, so stretched with all the visitors living in it. No matter. He would find room for one more. Chapter 26, Dome 1, Thrid. Duck was hiding in her tunnel. She had wormed her way down as far underground as she dared. Her face was dirty, streaks from her tears striping down. Nothing was okay. They had had a big adventure and saved the nice lady, but now everyone knew them and wanted to visit. Everyone. Uncle David had thought that using camera bots to film the rescue would mean they could release video to the rest of the galaxy and make everyone want to hire the defense team. But now the tourist area by the shuttle landing pad was crammed with people, and there were ships in space whirling around, trying to get permission to land. Auntie Maggie spent all her time on the phone, arguing with people who wanted to come down and talk. Uncle David said that fame was not what he had bargained for, and Mama too had tight lips all the time. Auntie Fran and the rest of the defense team were always in phase, patrolling both domes in case a bad person snuck onto the planet. Duck knew why everything was a mess. It was her fault. She had gone on that show and talked too much, and then she'd gone along on the mission, and now everyone in the whole galaxy thought she was their friend. Duck wished she could go back in time and just erase the whole thing. She didn't want to be friends with everyone. People had always been interested in her, as a visitor, but they just used to write her letters or come and stand in the force field with signs like, "Be strong," or "Duck, you're so brave." It had felt strange and a little creepy, but Mama too had said it was because sometimes people saw her as their daughter, even though she wasn't. But ever since the video had come out, people had become interested in her, and in a different way. She had just been visible for a moment, a small figure in a blacked-out skin suit walking single file into a cave. But it was enough when combined with her appearance on the talk show. The signs in the tourist area changed, and suddenly they read things like, "Duck, you are first in my heart," and "Our love cannot be denied." Mama too frowned when she saw the signs, and Uncle David had strengthened the force field. It wasn't just Duck. Mama too, Uncle David, and Auntie Maggie had relentless admirers. Feather had her own fan club, though no one knew which visitor was Feather. The Miss Maggie's Lonely Hearts Club had to be canceled because Uncle David said it was too dangerous now. This morning, one of the tourists in the force field cage grabbed another tourist and threatened to kill them if Duck didn't come live with him on his home world. After that, Uncle David had told her to stay in her room at Auntie Maggie's house so she'd be safe. Duck had gone to her room, but it was too big, with no good out-of-sight spots. Her face was frozen in a frown like Mama too, and she didn't feel safe at all. She needed someplace to be unseen, somewhere smaller where she could duck and hide. Duck had slipped out of her window and crouched low as she ran through the growing fields. She made it to her tunnel and dove in quickly, sealing up the entrance like near Totter. Small spaces were safe spaces. Back in the prison lab, she would tuck herself into small spaces and stay safe while the adults fought the Thridians. When she got better at fighting, she would leave her cubbyholes to run in and jab at the big piles of ooze. By the time she left the prison lab, she had become adept at inflicting her own small brand of damage. Now, though, she didn't know what to do. It was harder to fight back when you couldn't see what you were trying to hit. Maggie clicked off her comm and turned to face David and Eleanor. They were in her living room, patrol rosters scattered on the coffee table. "We have managed to keep everyone off the planet except the tourists with reservations, but there are alarms going off on Skylab now." David nodded. "We're getting unknown craft proximity alerts. An unauthorized ship arrived a few minutes ago and is perched just outside the legal space buffer." "What do you mean perched?" asked Eleanor. "It's lurking, just outside the declaration zone," said David. "It doesn't have to announce itself, therefore we can't determine whether to leave it alone or tell it to leave." "Any identification markings?" asked Fran. "A few, but none registered through normal galactic channels," replied David. Paolo is looking them up. That's all we need. Another ship on top of the dozens already circling Thrid. Fran sat down and sighed. When does this end? David looked at his comm. More than one new ship. Looks like we're getting flooded with unknown craft. Maybe we should leave Thrid for a bit, just until this blows over and the galaxy gets a new set of darlings, said Maggie. Eleanor shook her head, her face filled with dismay. Had I known this would be the result, I never would have gone on that show. And I would have never released that footage of Feather taking that arrow, added David. His comm unit crackled. He pressed a button and Paolo's voice rang through. David, are Eleanor, Fran, and Duck with you? Do you have eyes on them? Eleanor and Fran, yes, replied David. Duck's in her room. Why? That unknown ship belongs to a bounty hunter. I did some checking, and there's a bounty out on the three of them. What? David's face grew red. Eleanor stood up quickly. Maggie put her arm around her. Fran left, heading in the direction of Duck's room. Not kill, said Paolo. Possess. Hold on. The comm went silent. Fran ran back into the room, dialing her comm. Duck's gone. She held up a finger. Duck, duck, goose, she said into her comm, then gave the all-clear thumbs-up sign as Duck's voice piped through. Fran turned away and started talking quietly into her comm. Eleanor's face crumpled, and she put her face in her hands. David's comm sputtered to life again as Paolo came back on the line. We've got 4 bounty hunters in orbit around Thrid, none of whom will identify themselves, but their ships are as famous as they are. David ran his hand through his hair. If one, just one of those hunters gets through. We've got to leave now. Start packing. I need to get to my office, said Maggie. There are things there that should be locked up if we're leaving Thrid. And go where? Asked Eleanor. Where is safe when the whole galaxy has decided you're the flavor of the month? Her chin trembled, but she took a deep breath and clicked on her comm unit. Let me see who I can reach on the galactic security panel. Maybe we can get some muscle to scare away these bounty hunters. David nodded. I'll find somewhere safe for us to go. Duck pulled her cards out of her pocket and leaned back against the wall of her tunnel. She had brought the whole deck with her today. There was a lot going on, and she hadn't been sure which card to put in her pocket. She shuffled through the deck, waving sadly at Uncle Osie's card when it passed in rotation. Duck's comm buzzed. Hello, my name is Duck. Duck, duck, goose. Auntie Fran, I am tucked in a small space. Well done. Small spaces are good when things feel large. However, your presence is being requested. Where are you? We have a plan, and we need your help. Are the tourists loose? Duck tried to remember where she had put the little dagger she had worn strapped to her leg back at Burston. No, we're going to hide out for a bit in a safe place until all this brouhaha dies down. But I would like to come get you. Does the safe place have tourists? Nope, no tourists. What do you think? Shall I come get you? When do we go? Hopefully today. We just have to finish packing and find a few stray runabouts. Duck knew she was one of the strays. I'm at the southeast edge of the dome by the big blue bush with the yellow flowers, behind the field with the plants that smell like old milk. Will you help me pack? How long will we be gone? I will help you pack. I don't know how long we'll be gone, at least a few days, but we will come back when it's safe. Duck tried to keep her voice even, but it cracked as she spoke. I like my room here. I like my friend near, and I like digging. I know. Duck clicked her comm off and wiggled her way back up to the surface. Once above ground, she stayed low, hiding behind the blue bush until she felt the air crisp and knew that Auntie Fran was there. She felt better. Auntie Fran would keep her safe. She should still try to find her little dagger, though. Ose, the estate, Punjar. Ose smiled at his mother and did his best to be cheerful. Dinner was taking longer than usual. The cook had outdone itself and everything was delicious, but his mother seemed distracted and the conversation was stilted. He was weary of sitting, eating, talking. All he really wanted to do was review the notes and footage from Ori's rescue and go over his brief time with Feather yet again. He had been home for a week now, but was no further along in figuring out who she was. His mother, Lady Wennel, smiled back at him. She sat in her chair like a queen on her throne, posture impeccable, movements graceful. Her white hair was piled high to support her headdress. Her pale skin shone translucent with age. She wore a simple lavender gown, woven through with her own star pattern, her husband's crescent, and the twisting helix shape that denoted mourning. "How long will Cy be at the Lucent Sanctuary? I'd love to get his advice about the flowering hedges near the lake cottage. They're looking a bit wilted." "He'll be back in a few days." A pang of guilt flared within Osei. "I don't mind taking a look at the hedges." He froze as a figure started forming in the air to the right of his mother. Maybe it would be Feather. She had already appeared once, silent and slightly transparent, the day after the battle. He tried to keep his eyes on his mother, but they kept shifting over to the glowing shape next to her. "Would you? I know you're busy, but it's a bit distressing to see perfectly healthy plants suddenly looking so dismal." Lady Wennel tilted her head slightly. "What are you working on in that little bunker of yours? I wish you'd just take over your father's old study. He's been gone for quite a while now, and he'd have wanted you to use it." Osei shook his head. "No, but thank you." The figure coalesced into Eleanor, her face twisted into a sneer. His heart sank. Silence stretched and filled the corners of the room. Lady Wennel put down her fork and sighed. "Osei, we need to talk." "Mother?" Osei felt a bit alarmed. His mother had never said such a thing before. Eyes wide, Eleanor sat on the edge of the table. Lady Wennel was silent for a moment and then spoke softly. "Osei, as you know, my birthday is approaching." "Indeed," said Osei, ignoring Eleanor, who was now stretching across the table, straight through the floral centerpiece. "What would you like to do? Shall we have an event? You will be turning 200, and it's an auspicious occasion." "We can determine that at another time," said his mother. "Right now, we need to talk about the estate. The land needs time and attention and stewardship. I know you've been here for this last cycle, but I need to know if you intend to take over the estate." She paused. "If not, I'd like to gift it to someone else on my birthday." Eleanor moved all the way across the table and put her face close to Osei's, grinning. Her voice echoed in his head, low and hissing. "You are consistent, aren't you? Over and over, everywhere you go, everything you do, you fail. You can't even keep your family estate. Won't help your mother. Consistent, Osei." "The estate needs someone to manage it, someone to walk the land and love it," said Lady Wennel. "We are fine for money. Your father and I made certain of that. But the boathouse is falling down, the lake is full of algae, the maze is overgrown." Osei swallowed hard. He tried to look through Eleanor and meet his mother's level gaze. His parents had always allowed him his head, even when he was hell-bent on going down a path that was the least rational, the least helpful for the family. Now his mother was offering him a choice. Commit to the land and the estate, or let it go. He wished Eleanor would back away. He couldn't think with her face so close to his, her eyes glittering with malice. "I would like to talk to Cy. I know what I would like to do, but it's only fair that I speak with him, as the decision will impact his life as well." Osei kept his voice level with effort. "Look at her, Osei." Eleanor's voice in his head sounded sad. "Look how old she's become, how thin, how fragile." Her face was still close to his, her grimace contorting into a frown. He leaned to the side slightly and looked at his mother with a stranger's glance. He saw the frailty of her wrist as she rested her hand on the table. He noticed details he'd missed before. The headdress she had worn to countless dinners over the cycles had been slightly modified. A few chimes removed, some of the supporting pieces narrowed to put less weight on her older bones. His mother's movements still held grace. She still commanded any room she entered. But she was aging. Tears filled his eyes. Osei forced a smile. Lady Wennel nodded and stood up. Osei rose as well and bowed as his mother left the room. When he straightened, an illusory David had joined the imaginary Elenin. The two of them were dancing, cheek to cheek, slowly swaying together on top of the table. Thank you for listening to Ose, Book 2 of the Visitor series. Ose was written by Pamela Zero. This podcast was recorded and edited by Pamela Zero. The song Ghosts was written, sung, and produced by Pamela Zero. Background music is called Insight, and it's by Megan Wofford. Ose is available in paperback on Amazon. Please be sure to like and subscribe and visit thevisitorseries.com for more info. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.